Yeah, it had a big impact early, and we expected for these rounds to have, for drivers to have round or issues in these rounds.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the DK Garage. I'm Jeremy.
And I'm Joe.
Well, Joe, there's not a lot of talk about at Darlington, man. It was a really clean race. All the playoff drivers, none of them had issues. No one got fined or did anything reckless. It was a very surprisingly clean NASCAR race. We could probably just jump right into Richmond. Denny Hamlin won. It's pretty much all. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Of course, a lot of stuff happened this week at this past race at Darlington. Not a big surprise. We saw McDowell kind of have some issues early. They were running fairly well, which was a little surprising, but unfortunate for that team, they're in a big hole. But also fortunately for that team, there was like 6 other playoff drivers, I think, who had issues. What was some of your kind of fast takeaways from Darlington, especially with some of these playoff drivers who are a little bit in a hole right now?
Yeah, it had a big impact early, and we expected for these rounds to have, for drivers to have round or issues in these rounds, but to have Alex Bowman, Kyle Busch, William Byron, you mentioned Michael McDowell, but those are really big drivers, especially my pick for the championship this year, Kyle Busch,
And you didn't even
really got
and you didn't
impacted.
even mention the defending champ, Chase Elliott. He also had
Yeah, Chase
issues.
Elliott even had, yeah, he even had issues. But yeah, my pick for the championship this year was Kyle Busch. We just got done talking about it in our last episode. I have him really having an impact on these playoffs, and he's now a couple points below the cut line with a bad finish at Darlington, and it's one of those deals where he's only got 2 weeks to get back in the mix this week. Luckily at Richmond, we'll get to that here in a little bit and kind of dissect that race, but he's pretty solid at Richmond. Hopefully he can get a bounce back. Only being 2 points below the cut line at where we're at this point, it's definitely doable. But Alex Bowman, William Byron, those two drivers there at the Hendrick in the Hendrick stable, they're going to need things to really line out in their favor here in the next 2 weeks if they look to make the cut, because in my opinion there's a couple drivers that might be able to solidify their standings moving forward outside of this Richmond race.
So another driver that we hadn't mentioned yet, and he's still technically good on points. Currently, he's 22 points to the good, but we kind of called it. He's actually a championship 4 driver for me, potentially, but I kind of said the way these first rounds are, they don't work out good for him. So the fact that he got wins late in the year helped him out. But Ryan Blaney, he led some laps, was looking okay, but his history, it kind of came through again. He didn't have a very good finish. He wasn't hurt as much because so many other guys also had worse finishes. Matter of fact, some of them didn't even finish the race. But we're going to a track at Richmond that's also a struggle for him. So we were kind of right on that in that regard, but that's also going to be concerning for that 12 team. I think they have potential to go make a deep playoff run, but they have to get past this first round. And with what we've seen already, I think that's not looking good for that team. Any thoughts on Ryan Blaney after Darlington?
Yeah, it was not a great day for him and that team to get the playoffs started after coming in hot. You looked at the data and kind of pointed it out that, hey, he's got some work to do here at Darlington. It's not one of his favorite tracks or his best tracks, and he had a place differential of -21. It was rough. That is something that he will need to improve on heading into Richmond, and it's not one of his ideal tracks either. So it's nice that he got those two wins late in the season to kind of help pad the playoff points that he had built up now. But yeah, he's not sitting pretty, and somebody I think that might be in a interesting position because they didn't have a fantastic day at Darlington, but they've set themselves up for a nice little playoff push. Is Eric Amarola? He's in a decent spot since there's been a couple drivers struggle to begin this. He didn't have a strong day, like I said. He started 8th, finished 16th, but that when you're doing points racing at this point, he's put himself in a position where if there's a couple issues and he has a strong performance here at Richmond, he might be in a nice spot.
So Richmond and New Hampshire, they're not obviously the same tracks. They do race a little differently, but both are fairly flat, shorter, and around that mile length. Amarola won that race. They're showing up to this race with that same car. I believe, I know I said it to you somewhere. I believe I said it in our playoff kind of predictions video where I don't expect Amarola to get past the first round. I think that ultimately, at least going into it, I thought that they'd just be behind on points. But now with some other drivers getting in there and having some issues like a Kyle Busch, Bowman, Byron, obviously McDowell, if he has a strong running, even if he doesn't win this race, if he finishes top 5, which, I mean, that car at New Hampshire was certainly capable of that. We saw him, obviously win. So if he can do that and just have a not terrible day at Bristol, he might point his way in. And then he's a legitimate threat to win Talladega. I don't see him necessarily. I think he can have an okay day at Vegas. I think he would struggle at the Roval. But you get him at one of his better tracks, Talladega, where anything can happen, where you don't have to have the fastest car to win. You just have to be there at the end. Amarola now, if he gets past this round, he is a legitimate round of 8 threat. And to be honest, you take away that win, he doesn't even make the playoffs. That's how this format works. We could have a completely different discussion on if it should or shouldn't be like that, but this is what all the drivers are competing in. Gotta say, that 10 team's gotta be feeling pretty good right now. They gotta be fairly confident, I would think.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if they use the start of this as momentum and actually have a strong day at Richmond. The thing that I definitely don't want to skip over, as you talked about some of these teams at the top, Denny Hamlin and Kyle Larson. What a battle that was at the end there at Darlington. It really did look like a video game. Kyle Larson just sent it into the corner to try to grab a victory, and Denny Hamlin, who just kind of handed over the season lead to Kyle Larson the last handful of weeks. He did everything in his power to kind of get a jump start on these playoffs. We thought about where this team might be, where their mindset is, and now we know, hey, they're in it to win it, and I am excited to see if Denny Hamlin and that team are actually primed and ready to go. And I think this week, the entire Gibbs stable at Darlington is going to be fun to watch after the performance there at Darlington. We know Kyle Busch needs something to happen here. We also saw Christopher Bell not have a bad day, so he's in an interesting spot. And then Martin Truex Jr. might not have lived up to the hopes we had there for him at Darlington. What are your thoughts on the Gibbs stable at Darlington and their hopes moving forward in the playoffs?
Well, from a DraftKings My Lineup perspective, Truex was one of the most disappointing drivers on Sunday night. I'm not going to say he's dead to me, but he certainly didn't. He's not helping his case. I think I'll have to go back to him a little bit this week. We'll get into kind of why. So from that perspective, yeah, I wasn't happy with Truex, at least that 19 team. But they had legitimately one of the fastest cars. If they don't have I believe it was a speeding penalty late in the race on the last round of pit stops and having to fight his way back, he might have actually beat Denny Hamlin. that's about how his car was running. He had fresher tires. He was running them down. Um, if they had had another restart, I think he potentially could have got there. But once he got so spread out, I mean, it's really hard to make that up, even if you have slightly fresher tires. I think they said he had maybe 4 or 5 lap fresher tires. I forget now. Either way, the Gibbs organization's got to feel pretty good, except for the Kyle Busch situation. His comments after the race would suggest that they aren't very happy, or at least he's not very happy with where his car's at. But I don't know if it was you or I, or we both probably said it at some point. He has clearly been better on the 550s this year, the 550 package, than the 750, whereas Hamlin's been pretty good on both. Truex has clearly been better on the 750s. I think you probably would say the same for Bell. So it seems like for whatever reason they've geared that 18 team to be a little bit better at the 550s, and the rest of them are kind of a little bit more geared for these 750 tracks. So I'm not worried about Kyle Busch, but I am worried about him getting out of this round. If he gets out of this round, I think he can still cruise and make his way in. You know, the points kind of reset if he's able to get a couple extra playoff points or whatnot. He can still make the championship 4. And if he gets to Phoenix, he could win. But now here's what I would say about your pick. If he does get to Phoenix, and that is a little bit of an if now with the Holies in, that's a 750 track. I get it. It's all on the line. They'll have practice. That's a huge advantage for Kyle Busch. They clearly are not the same without practice and qualifying. But still, you got to think that's a little concerning there if you're on that 18 team. But I do think, personally, I think they can claw their way out of it. Hamlin, also very impressive, especially after the week that he had. Even in the Xfinity race, he should have won that if it wasn't for a questionable pit penalty, I would say. Apparently equipment over the wall too soon, but the tire was literally just resting there. I don't see the advantage there, but hey, I didn't make the rule book. So Gibbs, yeah, you're right. Gibbs is going into a track that they're strong at, coming off of a fairly good performance at Darlington. They're strong, but I think before we kind of move on from Richmond, I wanted to kind of talk about a couple guys real quick. We don't have to go too deep in there. But Kurt Busch, he's set up nice. He had a really good run, had a good finish. Both Brad and Joey, they had decent days. We were expecting a little bit more. I was expecting a little bit more out of Brad, given his track history, but they both had they stayed out of trouble, right? And then I think the guy who came in, I mean, I don't have him advancing out of this round, but I think a guy that is really dangerous if for some reason they can find that extra little bit that they're missing, and who looked good at Darlington, was Kevin Harvick. We texted a little bit about this during the race. Also going to a track that he's really good at. I don't know if they've quite found it, but dang, if he starts hitting on these cylinders again, he's a dangerous playoff threat, and he legitimately can make his way to the championship 4. What are your thoughts on any of those drivers I just talked about?
Yeah, Kevin Harvick's going to be someone to watch, going to be in an interesting spot. We knew Darlington is one of his ideal tracks to get this thing rolling, and Richmond's right there to back it up. He's very, very strong there. So if that team can find some momentum that we haven't seen consistently, and it becomes consistent, watch out, because that would be fun to watch. And you did mention that 750 horsepower that we hadn't seen Kyle Busch in as top shape as he is whenever we're looking at 550. The same kind of is said with Kyle Larson, but Kyle Larson obviously performed very well there. So that was good to see if you're a fan of Hendrick, and concerning if you're a Kyle Busch fan. And then also one thing I wanted to take away from Darlington that really hammered my lineups, if you will, and really squashed my hopes of having a solid day was I had a good bit of exposure to Matty D, and that didn't work out that well because, as you kind of alluded to multiple times throughout the season, he seems to be better in 550 horsepower equipment. Last week's race and this week's race obviously are both 750 horsepower packaged races, and Man, at this point, he's almost dead to me in the environment of DFS. It sucks because he's one of my favorite drivers to watch. I root for him, but at the same time, this is unbiased information, and by the time you're going through everything, it's not a fun place to be whenever you're looking at how enticing a 30th starting position Matty D's sitting, and he only gets 23rd place. It hurts your value whenever you're looking at it like that, and that was one of my main takeaways from Darlington.
So if you guys can't tell, this is the Benedetto hat. So I'm there with you. But as I started to construct my lineups and we got to that pivotal point between Buescher, De Benedetto, and Chastain, they were in similar but obviously different positions on how your lineups worked. And I know I kind of talked him up. I gave him a pretty solid rating on our impact score, all three of them. But in the end, as I was building, I didn't actually look at the data. I just knew kind of based off of what I've seen this year. And I'm like, I personally couldn't get behind De Benedetto that much. He was in some lineups. I used the optimizer. Obviously, he came up in some. But I shifted a lot of my ownership to Chris Buescher and Chastain, or just avoided all three of them and then went other way because I knew that all three were going to be, chalky. I wish I'd gone more Chastain and Chris Buescher because both of them were lights out. But at the end, and this is why we present this information in different ways, it would not have surprised me if Matty D had somehow finished the top 10, especially after all the playoff drivers had trouble. But I leaned on what the data suggested, and it said these other guys, when Chris Buescher seems to pop off, it seems to kind of happen a little bit more at 750s, at least in my opinion, and for sure for Chastain. And that's what ultimately swayed my decision at the end. Still wasn't enough. I didn't have enough of the right combos. There were some other guys that did a little better than what we thought. But I get it, man. That's a tough burn. But I wanted to go back real quick because you kind of said something. You made it seem like there was a huge gap. But I want to just make sure everyone kind of gets this. So you said that Kyle Larson is not as good on 750 as he is in 550. And I can somewhat agree with that. But if I'm just looking at the regular season stats, I'm not including Darlington. You're right. He is, driver rating wise, he is rated higher in the 550. Actually, hold on a second. This is not, hold on a second. We need to update this real quick, my man. Oh, it's actually even worse, bro. So in the 750, he has the top driver rating for everybody for the regular season. That includes 3 wins. That's Kyle Larson I'm talking about, 110.7. And in 550, he is actually second behind Kyle Busch at 109. So realistically, he's the same on 750 or 550 at this point. I know we can kind of pick and choose between different races, but Larson has been lights out no matter which track we pretty much go to, which package we're in. He's been really, really solid, whereas Kyle Busch is number 1 in 550, but when we go back to 750, he actually rates out as, where is he? 7th best driver. Not bad, but also not great. So a bigger difference between Kyle Busch between the packages than there is with Kyle Larson.
Yeah, and it's understandable. I'm not saying in my opinion, yeah, Kyle Larson has been the most consistent Kyle throughout the year, but Kyle Busch has a great deal of upside that has not risen to the top yet. I don't think we'll finally see some of that maybe here in the next stretch of races because he's going to need to improve his playoff standings. It was fun to kind of see how the optimal lineup played out at Darlington, seeing Corey LaJoie and Cole Custer and Ross Chastain and Chris Buescher being part of that. And that's something that's always fun to kind of see, and we try to put together a nice visual aspect of all the data and everything we talk about for the previous race in our DK results. It's basically a great slate review with some place differential information, the optimal lineup, and a lot of other performance points based information. So if you want to check that out, it's available on our Patreon. But yeah, Jeremy, Darlington was fun. Did you have any other takeaways before we dive into Richmond? Because this left a big impact on the playoffs for sure.
It certainly has. I think we've fairly discussed it quite a bit. I guess the last thing maybe we could have a brief discussion on. I don't think it has too much of an impact on the playoffs, but obviously it was a big hot topic this week on Twitter. I like a lot. I like NASCAR. Obviously, the fans are great, but man, it's amazing the difference of opinion NASCAR Twitter has. There are legitimately people thinking Kyle Busch should be suspended, parked for a whole race because of the way he entered the garage after having troubles at Darlington. Other people think nothing should happen, but ultimately NASCAR did fine him $50,000. People are complaining about that because that's not enough. I don't know. If you watched it live and then watched some replays, what was your opinion on the Kyle Busch incident going into the garage?
Well, I thought his contact with the pace car earlier in the season was a little bit more rowdy, if you will, than that incident. It's Kyle Busch. You expect him to add to the entertainment value of the sport, and he made his mark once again. The guy knows how to create attention, and he backs it up with wins typically. So he got fined $50,000. That's not going to make a very happy Kyle Busch. Kyle Busch doesn't need a lot of motivation to go get something done. And if he's getting $50,000 on top fine on top of wrecking a race car at the start of the playoffs, man, I'm looking for him to come out hot, and I think he does that in Richmond. It's one of those deals I can see where the fans can be ticked off and want him to be suspended for who knows how long. But how many Kyle Busch haters are out there? I'm not necessarily a Kyle Busch fan by any stretch of the imagination, but at the same time, man, it's fun to watch some old style NASCAR, and I enjoy kind of seeing a little bit of people going against the grain, and that was definitely that. I don't think he put anybody in immediate jeopardy and danger, and if you think so, then I think that we're a little bit too much of a society that we have to look both ways when we cross the sidewalk, even at a NASCAR event. Come on, you can see a car coming in pit road, but it was fun to watch, and definitely added to the entertainment value throughout the week, and Twitter erupted, and we can see that means that people had something to say.
So I think I kind of actually disagree a little bit with the pace car. I mean, I guess if you want to say just one or the other, okay, maybe it's worse. But I think given the context of the pace car incident, I mean, NASCAR completely screwed that up. That was clearly on NASCAR. I think they realized it. They recognize it. Like we know if we're on slicks and it's raining, you can't run these cars, and they still went green. And cars are starting to slide around the lap before, and they still didn't call it, and then he's taken out. So personally, I think that they let that one go. They probably would have suspended most people or fined them at least. The points docked them. But they know that they messed up there. Typically, we don't see cars enter the garage as fast as Kyle Busch did. I don't know how bad damage his car was. Maybe he couldn't have made that tight turning radius had he tried to avoid the cones. And instead of having to do this, 3 or 4 point turn just to try to make garage because of that situation, maybe he just kind of flew in there. You're right. I've been in the around the garage on pit lane, and yeah, when you're in that area, you got to have your head on a swivel. Ultimately, I think he should have been going a little slower. Just NASCAR had nothing to do with him wrecking. In his post-race interview, he was just talking about how garbage his car was. So that's not on NASCAR. Everyone else, there was his teammate didn't show. Two of his really, I guess you could say 3, but let's just say Truex and Hamlin, and, his teammates, they didn't show up with garbage cars for whatever reason. They were able to make the right adjustments to have solid days. The 18 team didn't. So that's not on NASCAR. I can see why they find him in this situation. I can't really say that I agree or disagree with it. It just kind of is what it is. I think the thing I'm just most frustrated about is it's just lack of perception, I guess, by some fans when you just let your biases dictate how you feel about an incident. If he had gotten points docked or even parked for a race, that would have been a super bad look, in my opinion. Again, I don't know if he could have made that corner. I don't know how bad the car was damaged. So that's kind of how I feel about it. I hope we see some more issues, I guess, little things like this, things that we can kind of talk about throughout the week. Obviously, I hope no one gets hurt.
Drama.
Yeah, I hope no one gets hurt because they're just trying to walk across the pit, in the garage. I don't want anything like that, but we need some stuff like this to kind of keep this playoffs going. NASCAR is now going head-to-head against the NFL, essentially. That's why we're getting 2 Saturday night races, so we don't go exactly head-to-head with the NFL. So they need some storylines to keep this train rolling, to have a good playoffs and take us all the way into Phoenix. I know obviously I'll be watching, you'll be watching, but this is just a reality that NASCAR has to face. They are not going to be the main sport on Sundays anymore.
Yeah, it's that time of the year. NFL is back, and therefore they get kind of kicked to the curb. It'll be fun to see how many people tune in and want to catch the playoff atmosphere in full effect for the last 9 races here. But Richmond is going to be fun. This short track action, and I enjoy watching this race. It seems to be typically that these get to have a lot of long runs because it's not the half-mile tracks and it's not the mile-and-a-half tracks or even the mile tracks. It's this 3/4 mile distance at Richmond that kind of plays to longer runs due to the fact that you get a little bit more stretched out. The field kind of gets a little bit more stretched out, but you have multiple lap cars and things that you have to take into effect. So strategy is definitely something to consider this week. And with it being a 300-mile race, number of laps is 400. That is a big effect whenever you're looking at potential performance points. With 280 of them being available, it's going to be kind of similar to last week, but I think we see potentially a couple dominators once again. It's going to be fun to see who ultimately plays into this. Is it Kyle Larson starting on the pole, or is Denny Hamlin, last week's winner, the guy that might run away with it? But then you look at Martin Truex and Kurt Busch there on the second row. Those guys have both been interesting guys in this package, and Kurt Busch has been really consistent throughout the years. There's so many things we could even start talking about to get Richmond underway. Where do you want to start at, Jeremy?
I might as well just kind of start with some recent track history. And of course, NASCAR's changed the packages up over the years, so we're not getting exact apples to apples, but these guys are professionals. They need to get the most out of these cars anyway, and typically you're going to see a driver who's good at a track be good at that track no matter what package they show up with. They might have a little bit of performance dip or gain, but again, if you're pretty good, you're pretty good. So when it comes to Richmond, and I also pulled some track type form races to get a little bit broader picture, but I'm looking at the last 6 Richmond races, and so that's going to include some different packages on this track. But really, the 2 guys we've kind of been talking about quite a bit are right up at the top. Martin Truex is going to come in clearly with the best driver rating, 125.8 versus the second place driver at 111.6. Truex has 2 wins and 5 top 5s out of the last 6. That second driver is his teammate Kyle Busch. They need to have that kind of performance, but if we go into the split between 550, 750, I think he can have a good run. I don't know if he's going to be that second dominator. So when I'm kind of looking at it, I'm looking at Truex and maybe a Hamlin. This really is a little bit, if we start looking at Larson, this isn't a track that he's typically excelled at. I mean, he has a win here in the past, but not in his last 5 races here, and he doesn't have any top 5. So this could be one of those races where Larson is just really not existent, and we see a battle between the Gibbs cars, Penske, and then maybe the previous winner we had earlier this year, Alex Bowman. Maybe he somehow sneaks up in there. That's kind of what I'm seeing. I think we can look at some of the data from the previous race here earlier, but I think we should have a good idea who's going to run well, barring any crazy accidents like what we had at Darlington.
Yeah, and that's something that if someone wants to go if you want to go take a look at our DK results, we have that available on our Patreon for free. If you want to go look at our previous race data for the race earlier in the season here at Richmond, you can go check that out. It's going to break that down for you, but yeah, it's going to be fun to see kind of who is in the right spot, because there are a lot of drivers that when you start looking at the data have solid numbers. It's really going to be difficult for me, I think, to put, hey, I think this guy and this guy and this guy are going to be the dominators. It's going to be very difficult to pinpoint that because a lot of drivers have decent numbers here. You can really look at it that there are 10 to 12 drivers here that have very consistent numbers with each other. A couple stand out, obviously, like you mentioned, Martin Truex and Kyle Busch. Then you got Brad Kay and Alex Bowman that have won here recently.
And Brad won this race last year and dominated this race.
Yeah, exactly. And then you got guys that are very consistent here with finishes like Kevin Harvick and Denny Hamlin, Joey Logano. These guys that are in the playoff mix that are racing for points and understand that every position is a point, as Rick Allen would say. This is something that we're going to have to figure out because to me, out of this 3-race stretch, this right now here this week at Richmond is the biggest wild card because we know who was strong at Darlington. We knew who's going to be strong at Bristol. Right now, I think this really unlocks the doors to who might be advancing. And I'm really looking at Gibbs this week because I think it's going to be either Martin Truex, Kyle Busch, or Denny Hamlin that gets the job done. Because like you just alluded to, Kyle Larson really doesn't have the greatest numbers here. He's kind of been inconsistent at this track because when you start diving into the data out of this last 6 races that you have put together in the garage slots, he's got 5 events here, 3 top 10s, which is strong, but he has 0 top 5 finishes, which is concerning whenever you're looking at like a Martin Truex Jr. who's had 5 top 5 finishes in that 6-race stretch, and his teammates that have at least 2 or 3 in that same time span. So it's going to be fun to watch to see who kind of rises to the top this week.
See, I almost feel a little differently about the next 2 races, actually. I feel like Richmond, again, any crazy things, I feel like Richmond is a little bit more predictable. The hardest part is obviously getting those dominators, but I think there's enough wiggle room there. You can run some different combos with drivers. I think we kind of have a good idea of who can be good and maybe some sneaky plays. But when I start looking at like the last 6 Bristol races, not including the dirt, we've got 5 different winners. And at Richmond, we have 4, but 2 of those guys have 2 wins apiece. There's only 1 driver with multiple wins. And when I'm looking down at it, I'm like, okay, how many drivers have the potential to win Bristol? I think there's 9, 10, 11, maybe 12 drivers, most playoff. I think maybe 1 or 2 not playoff. And if I'm looking at Richmond, I think there's 5, 6. And again, that's where, obviously things can get crazy at the end. We could have some guys try to video game it earlier in the race than what Kyle Larson. I mean, obviously there's so many directions this can go. But if we're just looking on paper, the way I see it, I think Richmond's is a little bit more telling on who should perform well, whereas Bristol, I think it's a little more wide open. I think there's a lot of guys who the Bristol cutoff race is going to be intense next week, no matter what. Because, I think Chase is going to have to run well there. I don't really think Chase is going to get a win at Richmond. I think he can run well, but I think he's going to have to do really well at Bristol. We've seen that. We've seen both the main Penske driver. Actually, all three Penske drivers are really solid, and one or two might need a win depending on how Richmond goes. Bristol's going to be a very intense cutoff race. I think Richmond is a little bit more predictable, but it's still going to be challenging in its own right, because here's the thing. This is a playoff race. We can sit here and tell you all about all the playoff drivers and their stats, but when it comes to DraftKings, if we're playing that game, we have to round this out with other drivers besides just that, and that's where I think that's where it's still going to have its own unique challenge this week. Anything, or what's your opinion on what I just said, and why am I wrong?
Well, I guess it sounds like we potentially might have some different impact scores then, if you view that there's only a handful of drivers that are capable of winning, because I think there are 2 times as many drivers as you think capable of winning this week. So I am excited to kind of see where we land on that, and those scores will be.
I'm curious. Just
okay.
Let's go through the list just real quick.
I truly think that Eric Almirola and Austin Dillon are going to be contenders here that might not be on the radar for some folks. And Christopher Bell, we were really high on Christopher Bell this earlier in the season. I know in our podcast for that race leading up for the Toyota 400, we really went into depth on Christopher Bell and his relationship with the crew chief and how that has progressed, and they are in a position, especially after last week at Darlington, after having a decent performance, that this could be a road or stepping stone for a solid year, and he could be someone that is able to advance if he has a strong day. So I really am looking at some of these younger drivers that might be off some folks' radar, because we could talk about all the Penske drivers.
I included them in my list that I told you to. I like all three of them. Yeah, but I think at the top, it's not as, it's a little bit more clear cut. Now, I didn't really include Harvick in that because I'm including what we've seen so far this year. So I don't have Harvick. I also don't have Kyle Busch. I know he's been really good, but I'm not including him in that list because he's been so terrible on 750s versus 550s. I know they're going to be in a hole, but if they're off just a little bit, because when I say also win, I kind of mean also like that dominator, not just who can get a win. We can see some drivers get some fluky wins, but dominating. I don't know if I see Dillon as a dominator. I think he could be a legit threat, and it should be really considered in our lineups. I think he can finish top 10. I think he can get some fastest laps, but I don't see him being the main dominator. I see it as Truex. Brad has a potential, but I kind of put him on a B tier based on what we've seen from that team this year. But I think just go back 1 year and they were great. Joey a little bit. They could do it. They've got some good history here. Obviously, Hamlin's going to be coming in strong. I don't really see Elliott being a dominator. I think he can have a good finish, but I don't see him being a dominator. Bell could. Almirola, I agree he could. I didn't expect them to do what they did at New Hampshire, so I think that they could. I don't think Kurt Busch. They have 0 top 10s in the last 6 races, so I don't necessarily see them dominating. Even Kyle Larson has kind of struggled. So that's why I'm kind of in a little disagreement. I think if I'm trying to figure out, okay, who's the guys that lead the bulk of the race? When I look at Bristol, we see a lot of different lap leaders there. There's also more laps. So the builds are going to be a little different between these two tracks. And I could, it's easy for Blaney to get out there and lead 100 laps. I don't see him really leading 100 laps here at Richmond. You could see Chase. You could see the other two Penske drivers. You could see so many drivers, Kurt Busch at Bristol. That's, I guess, where maybe we're kind of talking about two different things, but that's the way I see it a little bit different at Richmond versus Bristol.
Yeah, it's ultimately going to be fun to see how it all plays out. We can talk about it all day, but the playoffs are here, and I'm excited to see how Richmond shapes up. And I think it, like you're just talking about, we're going to be a little bit different potentially this week on our impact scores because I think based on what we're talking about, we have some of the same drivers in similar spots, but all the salaries and everything are going to factor into the ultimate decision and how it all plays out. And these guys in the middle are going to be fun to see who can potentially reach the peak value. Is there anybody that stands out to you that is usually in the bottom tier or middle portion of the player pool that you like this week based on what you've seen recently, or there's Richmond data?
No, I pulled, like I said, some kind of track type form, and I'm kind of looking over that now. I'm calling it like a 1 mile ish flat track type data. So it's last three here at Richmond, the last three at New Hampshire, and the last three at Dover. So there's a 9 race sample size. Harvick obviously is up there because of the two wins at Richmond. He's up there. Brad's up there. All the guys we've kind of talked about are up there. But someone that we've already talked about, but I just wanted to kind of extra emphasize, is Amarola. If we just look at the driver rating, he's got the 7th best driver rating out of anybody over these last few races, last year and a half essentially. That's really good for that team. That's why I can understand why you're on it. Obviously, Alex Bowman, he's got the 2 wins. He's won the Dover race and the Richmond race earlier. They need to get it going. So I'll be looking at both of those guys. Dylan, obviously, we mentioned him. I think really if I'm just kind of looking at this particular data, even though I still expect him to make the next round, Kurt Busch is a little concerning here because they have struggled on these type tracks. So Richmond could pose a bit of an issue for that one team, but I'd like him to circle back around at Bristol the following week. So, there's nothing else that really kind of stands out at me too much here at Richmond. Once we get the salaries and everything else kind of finalized and we have a chance to kind of go in and do our impact score, I think it'll help make the picture a little bit more clear of who we're going to need to talk about. Because obviously there's so many drivers that could be in a great spot on paper. But when the salaries and everything comes out, they may not be as good,
Yeah, because you look at like somebody like Corey LaJoie, for instance.
Right.
Last week had a great run at Darlington. He finished 21st here earlier in the season, so it's going to be fun to see how much exposure people have to him. There's going to be interesting scenarios down here because Michael McDowell, playoff driver, is going to have something to battle for, but he's not been great in this position. So we'll find out how all this ultimately shapes up, but it's going to be fun as we get further into this playoff mix to see where things kind of fall into position, and we'll be here every step of the way to kind of gain some information and present in a way hopefully that is beneficial to you.
So of maybe the top sort of projected drivers, let's just have a little fun with this one. Of the kind of the top projected drivers that we think should do well in this race, if there's one that you're looking at that potentially could have a bad day like Kyle Busch had, or Bowman, or Byron, who do you think that could be this week at Richmond?
Man, that's going to be something that I'm looking at Kyle Larson. Like you alluded to earlier, he doesn't have the best numbers here by any stretch of the imagination over his career. He's got a nice stretch of top tens, but he doesn't have the top 5 finishes that you would look at. He's been a lot stronger, obviously, this year, but there are a couple tracks that he has kind of struggled at, and this is one of them. He started earlier in the year at this race, started 6th, finished 18th, and really was not a threat throughout that race. Whenever you're looking at performance points or dominator points, if you will, He wasn't even close to the top of the leaderboard like you're accustomed to seeing for Kyle Larson. So that is something that is concerning to me. How about you? Is there anybody on the list that stood out to you?
Well, I'll just kind of piggyback real quick. Looking ahead, I know it's a little different, but Martinsville is another flat track. It's another track he's struggled at. He has a top five in his
Bristol, you
last.
mean?
No. I'm jumping ahead to Martinsville because Bristol's a high bank
Oh,
track.
okay.
Martinsville's
Yeah, no,
flat.
absolutely, yeah.
So I'm saying that there seems to be a little bit of a trend here with these flatter tracks. So that's a track that could pose a trouble for some Larson if he also makes it to that round. But over the last four, his average finish is 17.3. Does have the two top tens, one top five, no wins. Average running position 14.7. So it seems to be some tracks kind of similar to Richmond, these kind of flatter tracks, a little shorter. You wouldn't think that'd be the case with how good Kyle Larson is at driving anything, but this just seems to be something that he's still working on. So I agree. I think out of the likely to be high priced drivers, is potentially the most likely to struggle. But I think a little bit of surprise I think it's going to potentially come from the Penske group. I don't know if it's going to be Brad or Joey, but I feel like one of them's going to have a good race and one of them's going to get in some trouble. I don't have a good feeling on which one it's going to be. I don't see them both not having issues like they were able to avoid at Darlington. I think something's going to happen to maybe one or both. I don't know. But if I'm looking at some of these top rated drivers at this track, I'm kind of honing in on one of them. And I think maybe Brad, because he's been the more inconsistent of the two. But that's scary to say when, he led, what was it, over like 300 laps last year. Was absolutely ridiculous. So I'm not ready to put that one in stone. But that's probably where I would go. Last, I guess, kind of closing thoughts on this episode. I mean, we've covered quite a bit. It's kind of a different type of feel now that we're in the playoffs. We know these races kind of unfold a little differently. Drivers who aren't in the playoffs, they run a little differently against the guys that are. So it's a little harder to kind of pinpoint exactly how it's going to go. But we could certainly talk forever about the different scenarios. So I guess, do you have any closing thoughts or remarks that you wanted to let everyone know about?
Well, the playoff atmosphere in NASCAR is alive and well, and Kyle Busch got us fired up with that right off the bat. It's going to be fun to kind of see how this gets followed up. But I'm sure in my opinion, Gibbs stable will have something to say about that this weekend, and we'll figure out exactly who is going to win. But yeah, I'm excited to get in studio to do the race day rundown and bring that back. That was a lot of fun last week getting back to knock that out. It was our highest viewed video of all time. So thank you to all of you out there that give us a follow and subscribe. All of the people that were able to take part in that last week. It was a lot of fun to get that out there. But yeah, man, I'm excited to move forward and get that out to everyone and do our race guide and everything else that we do on a weekly basis and continue this through the playoffs.
Yeah, it puts
How about you?
It puts a little bit more of a crunch on us because this race is on Saturday night. So the next race. So, with the way the starting lineups come out on Wednesday, and then we usually get salaries on Wednesday night most times, it puts a little bit more of a crunch on us. But hey, we're here for it. These teams are put through the ringer. So are we. It's a long season. It is starting to kind of wind down, but we do have a 9 more races, so I know we're both excited to close out strong. Yeah, this first round each round is so unique, in this playoff format, and it's only going to get more and more intense. So I'm here for it. I'm about it. Even if it's going to be a shorter week, we're about it. I'm also looking forward to the Prize Picks video. That's been doing pretty well. We've both had some nice success with it. It's its own little challenging game, just like DraftKings is. But man, I would have had a really good week if it wasn't for Byron and Chase Elliott. Those guys screwed me the most. But I still profited, so I'll take that. So I'm looking forward to that this week too. So make sure you guys check that one out because it's a fun little game. And yeah, you don't have to worry about playing against anyone. You're just playing against projections. So I'm looking forward to that too.
Yeah, I am as well. It's going to be fun to kind of pair that with the NFL action getting underway. We talked about that kind of being the nemesis of NASCAR at this time of the year, but with the Prize Picks, you can pair the NFL action with this NASCAR action here at Richmond. It'll be fun. I will definitely be taking part of that. So if you want to check out our video, make sure you go ahead and subscribe to our channel. We appreciate that support. It helps us tremendously, and we appreciate you giving your input and thoughts in the comment section below. We have done some changes based on those comments, so we appreciate that engagement. If you want to follow us on our socials, those links are also available below in the description. So check us out on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, all those major platforms. And everybody that's listening on the audio-only version of our podcast, thank you very much. We truly do appreciate that support. It's been great to see the continued growth there. Lots of downloads happening, lots of reviews being left, which we truly do appreciate that. So thank you if you're doing that. So Jeremy, I'm excited to get this thing rolling, get the race day rundown out there to everyone. But for the DK Garage, I'm Joe, that's Jeremy, and we'll see you next time.